She ran into his arms thinking he was her brother, but he wasn't. He was a billionaire, and instead of calling security, he smiled. What happened next? No one saw coming. Grace Morgan had always believed that the most important moments in life arrived without warning, like a door opening without a knock, or the sky breaking into rain on a day you left your umbrella at home. She had experienced enough of those moments to stop expecting anything too neatly packaged or predictable. But nothing prepared her for the moment her world would tilt on its axis, in the middle of an airport of all places. The arrivals hall buzzed with chaos. Announcements crackled overhead. Luggage wheels clattered against tile floors. Children cried, lovers reunited, families hugged with the kind of relief that only time and distance could cultivate. Among them, Grace stood frozen in a sea of rushing strangers, her hands gripping the strap of her worn canvas purse so tightly her knuckles were white. She hadn't seen her sister Lily in nearly 2 years. The last time they hugged, it was outside. A hospital room, both of them trying not to cry as their mother slept behind the door, unaware it would be the last night she'd be alive. Grace stayed behind. Lily took the nursing job overseas, trying to send back money to keep things afloat. And now, finally, Lily was coming home. Grace scanned the crowd, her eyes darting between faces, her heart racing faster with every passing second. The gate door opened, and a flood of passengers spilled out. She stretched onto her toes, searching. Then she saw him, tall, lean, dark brown hair, slightly tousled, a navy blue jacket just like the one Lily's boyfriend had once given her, the same one Lily often wore on long flights. The figure walked calmly through the crowd, dragging a modest suitcase behind him. Grace didn't think. Her emotions surged like a wave too big to hold back. Without giving herself time to second guess, she rushed forward. And before she could stop herself, she threw her arms around him. "I missed you," she whispered, voice muffled against his chest. "So much." For a few seconds, the world around her stilled. The chaos, the voices, the movement, all of it faded. The warmth of the embrace was grounding, solid, safe, until it wasn't. Something didn't feel right. The body she held was broader than she remembered, firmer. This person smelled unfamiliar, a luxurious scent of wood and spice, so crisp and elegant it immediately set off alarm bells in her head. Her sister wore vanilla lotion and budget lavender spray. This was designer cologne, the kind sprayed onto suits worth more than her rent. Grace's eyes widened. Slowly, like waking up from a dream, she pulled back and looked up, and locked eyes with a man she had never seen before in her life. He wasn't Lily. He wasn't even close. He was stunning. That was the first thing that hit her. Not in a superficial way, but in a kind of staggering, inexplicable way that made her question whether he'd been airbrushed into reality. His jaw was sharp. His eyes were a piercing shade of gray, like a thunderstorm about to roll in. His dark hair was neatly styled, his suit crisp and tailored with a subtle elegance that whispered money instead of screaming it. But it wasn't just the way he looked. It was the way he looked at her, brows raised, a flicker of amusement curling at the corners of his mouth. For a single suspended second, neither of them spoke. Then she stumbled backward, horrified. "Oh." "My God, I'm so sorry," she blurted, hands flying up in panic. I thought you were someone else. My sister. She has your build." "And the jacket. I wasn't looking properly, The man said nothing at first. He tilted his head slightly, eyes dancing. "Well," he said at last, "I can't say I expected to be hugged today, but I've had worse welcomes." Grace felt her face flame red. "This is mortifying." "You looked certain," he said with a dry smile. "Like you've known me forever." I was certain. From the back. And clearly emotionally blind. "Emotionally blind," he repeated, Tasting the phrase, she nodded frantically. Yes, it's a condition where your emotions override basic visual cues and cause you to mistake strangers for loved ones. I read about it, probably. He chuckled then, a low, warm laugh. Well, I've never been hugged by mistake before, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy it. Before she could respond, a tall man in a black suit appeared beside him, his expression unreadable but alert. Mr. Callahan, the bodyguard said, scanning the area. Is everything all right? Callahan. The name hit her like a shock of cold water. No, it couldn't be. But the realization settled in quickly. Ethan Callahan. Tech genius. Media-avoiding billionaire. Founder of Orion Innovations. A man known for keeping his distance from the public eye and never giving interviews. A man she had just publicly tackled like a golden retriever greeting its owner. Her knees almost gave out. I have to go, she mumbled, already backing away. Good luck with existing. But he took a step forward, not blocking her, just close enough that she could feel the calm command in his presence. What's your name? He asked. She froze. Grace. Grace. He waited for more. That's it. Just Grace. No last name. No forwarding address. Well, just Grace, he said with that maddeningly amused tone. If you ever want to make another mistake, let me know. She didn't respond. She just turned and walked into the crowd, heart racing, praying to every god she didn't believe in that she'd never see him again. But life, as it turned out, had a flair for second chances. Later that afternoon, Grace clocked into her shift at a small coffee kiosk inside the airport terminal. The job wasn't glamorous, but it helped pay rent for the apartment she shared with a single space heater, an unreliable stove, and one grumpy goldfish named Vincent Van Growl. Most days, she kept her head down, made coffee, and avoided eye. Contact, Grace, her manager snapped from the back. Special order, table 12. Grace grabbed the tray, maneuvered past the midday crowd, and nearly dropped everything when she reached the table. It was him, Ethan Callahan, sitting like he belonged there, sleeves rolled, sipping water like he didn't own half the city. His storm-colored eyes met hers with amusement that hadn't dulled since the airport. You, she said under her breath. He smiled. Me. You followed me. I ordered coffee. You're a billionaire. Why are you sitting in a plastic chair at a budget cafe? He leaned back, folding his hands. Curiosity. About? You. She stared. You're unbelievable. So I've been told. She placed the cup down, her hands unsteady. Enjoy. Please don't make this a thing. Too late. As she turned to leave, his voice followed her like a thread tugging gently at her back. Grace, she paused. That hug, he said softly. Might have been a mistake, but it felt like something I didn't know I'd been missing. She didn't respond. Couldn't. She just walked away, heart pounding so hard it echoed in her ears. She had no idea what he wanted or why she mattered. But something about his voice, about the look in his eyes, told her this was not the end. It was the beginning. And somewhere deep inside her, beneath the layers of fear, doubt, and survival, she hoped he was right. The day after the accidental hug, Grace tried her best to resume normalcy, but normal no longer felt like something she could slip back into. Everything looked the same. Same cracked tiles in her apartment kitchen, same flickering hallway light in her building, same scent of burnt espresso hanging stubbornly on her clothes. But inside her, something had shifted. It wasn't just that she had hugged a billionaire by mistake. It was the way he'd looked at her, like she wasn't a nuisance or a curiosity, but something altogether real. That unsettled her more than anything. Grace had grown used to being unseen, not invisible exactly, but unnoticed. Her life had been shaped by quiet choices, working extra shifts instead of finishing school, settling for solitude over vulnerability. She had mastered the art of blending in, of being useful without being memorable. So when Ethan Callahan, a man who could have any conversation with anyone in the world, kept coming back to her, it felt less like a coincidence and more like a disruption. That morning she arrived at the coffee kiosk earlier than usual, hoping the extra time might help her breathe before the rush began. Her manager, George, a former barista-turned-boss whose patience had eroded sometime in the early 2000s, barely nodded as she tied on her apron and began prepping for the day. By 8 a.m., the airport terminal was buzzing. Business travelers, in tailored suits, barked into Bluetooth headsets. Families wrangled crying toddlers, and flight attendants glided past with practiced grace. Grace found her rhythm in the chaos, grinding beans, steaming milk, wiping counters. For a brief hour, she forgot him. She forgot his storm-gray eyes, the scent of his cologne, the way he had said her name like it deserved attention. Then, at 8:03, the familiar chime of the cafe entrance rang, and her breath caught in her chest. He was there, Ethan Callahan. This time, there was no suit, just a dark sweater, sleeves casually pushed up, a hint of stubble along his jaw. He looked effortlessly out of place in the plastic and fluorescent world of the airport coffee kiosk, like a misplaced figure from another life. A life where rooms were silent and people listened. He didn't walk straight up to the counter. Waited, standing at a distance, scanning the menu like a regular customer, like he hadn't derailed her entire sense of self the day before. Grace pretended not to notice him, pouring espresso into a paper cup with the kind of focus normally reserved for brain surgery. She prayed he would get bored and leave. He didn't. Finally, he stepped up to the counter, a half smile on his lips. "Good morning," he said, voice low and even. Grace raised an eyebrow. "You again?" "I could say the same. This is a public place." "I know," he said, then added, "But if it wasn't, I'd probably still find a way in." She narrowed her eyes. "Is this your thing? Following people who hug you by mistake?" He leaned slightly forward, not in a threatening way, but in a way that made it impossible to ignore the warmth in his eyes. "Only the ones who make me feel something I wasn't expecting." Grace stiffened. "Look, I don't know what you think is happening here." "Neither do I," he interrupted gently. "That's kind of the point." She folded her arms. "You're not used to hearing no, are you?" He looked thoughtful for a moment, then smiled. "Not really, but you make it sound interesting." Against her better judgment, Grace felt her lips twitch. She turned quickly toward the espresso machine, hiding the expression. "What do you want to drink?" she asked, more brusquely than necessary. He considered the board. "What do you recommend?" "Sleep and better judgment." He laughed. "Surprise me." She rolled her eyes, but there was a flicker of something that felt suspiciously like pleasure rising in her chest. She prepared a mocha because it was rich and bitter and slightly sweet. It felt honest. When she handed it to him, he took it with both hands, like it was a gift and not just overpriced caffeine in a paper cup. "I'm Ethan, by the way," he said. "I know, but you never told me your full name. I didn't think I needed to." "You still don't," he said, sipping the drink. "But it's nice to be known." Grace didn't respond. She didn't know how to. People didn't talk to her like that, not without wanting something. And yet Ethan didn't seem to want anything, not her number, not her story, not even her approval. He was simply present. The rest of the day passed like a dream, moving at half speed. Grace kept replaying their exchange in her head, each word lingering longer than it should. She tried to convince herself it was nothing. He was just flirting. Passing time, maybe bored between meetings. He would forget her by next week. That was the sensible thing to believe. But that night, just before she closed up, her phone buzzed. with an unknown number. "It's Ethan. I owe you another surprise me. Dinner instead of coffee this time." She stared at the screen for a long time. She thought about ignoring it, deleting the message, pretending her heart wasn't racing. Instead, she typed back, "One dinner, no suits, no limos, you come to me." His reply was instant. "Deal. I'll wear jeans. You pick the place. And I promise not to be charming, unless provoked." The next evening, they met at a small diner tucked into a corner of the city where neon signs flickered and the coffee came in chipped porcelain mugs. Grace arrived first, choosing a booth in the back, her nerves louder than she wanted to admit. When Ethan walked in, jeans, jacket, hands in his pockets, he looked like a man trying very hard to belong to a world that didn't demand perfection. They talked for hours. About nothing and everything. About her sister. About the smell of old books. About the freedom of long walks at midnight and the weight of always pretending to be okay. Ethan spoke less than he listened, and Grace found herself opening up in ways she hadn't with anyone in years. Not because she trusted him, but because he made her want to. At one point, during a lull in conversation, Ethan looked at her and said, "You carry so much silence, Grace." She didn't understand at first, he clarified. "It's in your eyes, like you've been holding your breath for too long." She looked away, blinking hard. "You don't get to do that." "Do what? See me?" He nodded slowly. "Then I won't say anything else." But he didn't stop seeing her. And that was the problem. When he walked her home that night, he didn't try to kiss her. He didn't ask to come up. He simply stood at the base of the stairs, hands in his pockets, and said, "Thank you for giving me a piece of your time." It felt like more than it should have. She hesitated. Then replied, "It did." She went to bed that night, feeling something she hadn't in a long time, unsteady but not afraid. The next morning, she woke up to a single message. "You made my world quieter last night. In the best way." And that's when she realized her accidental hug had started something she couldn't stop. Something that felt dangerously close to real. The days that followed were quiet, but not in the peaceful way Grace once longed for. They were the kind of quiet that hummed beneath her skin, like the air before a storm, charged, uncertain, heavy with questions she didn't yet have the courage to ask. The memory of that dinner with Ethan lingered longer than it should have. His words haunted her in a way no compliment ever had. "You carry so much silence." He hadn't said it to be poetic. He said it like he saw her. And maybe that was what frightened her the most. At the cafe, Grace tried to keep her head down. She threw herself into long shifts, taking extra hours when she could, cleaning even when there was nothing left to wipe. She told herself it was better this way. Distance, simplicity, avoiding complications. But her heart wasn't as easily convinced. Every time her phone buzzed, she half expected his name. Every time she saw a man in a dark sweater or caught a whiff of cedarwood cologne, she turned her head too quickly. But Ethan didn't show up. Not for days. Not a message. Not a surprise visit. And that silence, once her refuge, became unbearable. One evening, while wiping down the counter for the third time in a row, her coworker Jen leaned in and asked, "Okay, who is he?" Grace looked up, startled. "Who?" "You've been spacing. Out all week, and yesterday you accidentally poured oat milk into a black coffee order. That's not like you. So, who's the guy?" Grace forced a laugh. "There's no guy, just tired." But the lie sat sour on her tongue. That night, she walked home alone. Rain had started to fall in steady, whispering drops, soaking through her coat before she could find shelter. She didn't run. She welcomed it. The rain felt honest. It asked nothing of her, demanded no answers. It simply fell. When she reached her apartment, she stood at the base of the steps for a long time. Her phone remained silent. Her fingers hovered over his name in her contacts. She didn't press it. But the next day, everything changed. It was a Thursday afternoon. The cafe was slow, a lull between flights. Grace was restocking cups when the bell above the entrance rang, and she heard his voice. Calm, measured, familiar in a way that hit her chest before her brain could catch up. Do you still serve mochas? With emotional walls on the side, she turned too quickly. There he was. Ethan stood just inside the cafe, hands in his pockets, a faint smile on his lips. But his eyes were watching her with a quiet intensity that made it impossible to look away. Grace froze. You're back. I never really left, he said, but I figured you needed space. I didn't ask for it. No, he said gently. But you didn't ask me to stay either. She looked down, throat tight. I didn't think I had the right. He stepped, closer, still careful, like he knew she might bolt if he moved too quickly. I didn't come here because I expected something. I came because there hasn't been a single morning I haven't thought about that night. About you. She didn't speak. She couldn't. The cafe disappeared. The world outside blurred. All that remained was him and her and the ache between them. I miss your silence, he said, voice low. It sounds strange, I know. But the world I live in, it's loud. It's performative. No one talks unless they want something. You're the first person I've met who says nothing. And yet I hear everything. Grace's breath hitched. He continued. I've tried to forget you. I've tried to convince myself it was just a moment. A glitch in the universe. But it wasn't. You're not something I can forget. She swallowed hard. Ethan. I don't know what you want from me. I don't want anything, he said. I just want to know you. If that's all I ever get, I'll be grateful. The honesty in his voice undid her. It cracked something open, something she had kept locked away for years, under layers of duty and self-protection. Without fully understanding why, she reached under the counter and pulled out 2 paper cups. We close in 10 minutes, but it can stay. He smiled, and this time it wasn't charming or polished. It was soft, real. They sat at the back table, the cafe now empty except for the distant sound of the espresso machine winding down and the flicker of an old bulb overhead. Grace poured them each a drink. She didn't ask what he wanted. She just made it the way she remembered. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then softly, Grace said, I used to believe love was something that happened to other people. Ethan looked at her, careful not to interrupt. I thought maybe it was for girls who had soft lives, who weren't constantly trying to hold their families together, who didn't have to choose between groceries and electricity. I thought, if I wanted to be strong, I had to be alone. Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper. And now? Now I'm not sure what I believe, she said, her voice trembling. But I know that being around you terrifies me, because it feels like maybe, just maybe, there's more for me than just surviving. And I don't know if I'm ready for that. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. You don't have to be ready. I'll wait. As long as it takes. The contact was brief, but it grounded her. For the first time, she let the fear rise and didn't push it down. She let herself feel the weight of being seen, truly seen, and not running from it. They talked for hours. About childhood shaped by absence. About the loneliness that came not from being alone, but from pretending you weren't. Ethan told her about the first company he started at 19, the sleepless nights, the betrayals, the price of chasing, success. Grace told him about her mother's illness, about watching her sister leave, about the ache of always being the one left behind. When the lights flickered again, and the night deepened into something quieter, Ethan stood and held out his hand. She hesitated for only a second before taking it. He walked her home in silence, the city empty around them. When they reached her door, he didn't lean in. He didn't ask for anything. Instead, he said, "Whatever this is, whatever it becomes, I want you to know I didn't see you because of an accident. I saw you because I was finally paying attention." Grace didn't reply. But for the first time in her life, she didn't feel the need to fill the silence, because it was full. Full of everything they hadn't said yet. Full of everything they were slowly becoming. The days that followed moved like slow tides, carrying Grace into a strange space between the life she had always known and something new she was afraid to name. She didn't dare call it hope. Hope was fragile, and she had lived too long learning not to trust things that broke easily. But it lingered anyway, uninvited and persistent, weaving itself into the corners of her routines, her silences, and even her laughter. Something was shifting between her and Ethan, something neither of them had spoken aloud, but both of them felt. It was not sudden, it was not dramatic. It was the kind of change that came quietly, like spring thawing winter's grip one drop at a time. Ethan didn't disappear again. He showed up every day, sometimes at the cafe, sometimes at the bookstore on the corner where he claimed the armchairs had superior back support, and once at the public library, where Grace had gone in search of a forgotten poetry collection. She found him in the reading room, sleeves rolled, deeply immersed in a book she didn't expect him to read, Pablo Neruda of all things. When she asked what he was doing there, he simply said, "Looking for the words I don't know how to say." They didn't call what they were doing dating. It wasn't defined, and Grace preferred it that way. Definitions came with expectations, and expectations led to disappointment. This, whatever it was quieter than that, softer. There were walks through the park at dusk, long conversations about the little things, books they never finished, places they wanted to visit but never had time to, the kinds of dreams you once held close before life taught you to let go. They talked about loneliness in a way that didn't feel lonely. They shared pieces of themselves in the spaces between words. Ethan was not what she expected him to be. He was sharp, yes. His intelligence was quick, almost unsettling at times. But there was a restlessness beneath it, a tiredness that no amount of sleep or success could touch. He carried the weight of being looked at, but rarely seen. The more she got to know him, the more Grace realized he was not living the life he wanted, but the life he'd been too afraid to walk away from. And for someone who had spent her whole life surviving, that was something she understood deeply. One evening, Grace invited him to her apartment, not for dinner, not for anything elaborate, just tea. The space was small, cluttered with books and mismatched furniture, the walls still wearing the faded paint of years past. But Ethan didn't look uncomfortable. He looked at ease. He sat on the floor beside her tiny second-hand couch, back against the wall, legs stretched out. Trouble, her cat, who normally hissed at strangers, curled up beside him as if they were old friends. "This place feels real," Ethan said, cradling the chipped mug in his hands. "It's all I've ever had," Grace replied, watching him, over the rim of her cup. "I've lived in penthouses with floor-to-ceiling windows and staff who disappear before you enter the room. But I've never felt as human as I do in this apartment." She didn't know what to say to that. So she said, "Nothing." He looked around. "Do you ever wish for more?" She hesitated. "I used to, but I learned to stop asking for things I couldn't afford." "What if it's not about money?" he asked. She gave him a look. "That's easy for you to say." He set his mug down. "I know how it sounds, but I've spent so much of my life building things, companies, wealth, connections, and none of them gave me what this room gives me. It's not about the space, it's about what it holds." "What do you think this space holds?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Truth," he said, "and a kind of strength I've never known." Grace turned away, her throat tightening. She didn't want to cry in front of him, didn't want to unravel what little control she had managed to keep in his presence. But Ethan didn't press her. He simply reached across the space between them and gently touched her hand. Not to take anything, not to promise anything, just to remind her that he was there. The next morning, she found a note tucked under her door. "You make everything quieter. Let me show you something in return." 7 p.m. No dress code, just curiosity. She debated ignoring it, but she didn't. At exactly 6:55, she stood outside the address he had sent, an old building tucked away on a quiet street she didn't recognize. It didn't look like the kind of place a billionaire would own. It looked ordinary, forgotten. But when he opened the door, there was nothing ordinary about what she saw. Inside was an old storefront, dusty, empty shelves lined the walls, and there was a faint scent of forgotten wood and time. In the middle of the room stood a small table, with 2 folding chairs, a takeout bag, and 2 bottles of root beer. "What is this place?" she asked. "This," he said, stepping aside to let her in, "used to be a bookstore. I found it last week. It's been closed for years." She walked slowly through the room, fingertips grazing the shelves. "It feels like a memory." Ethan watched her. "I remember what you said once, about the dream you had when you were a kid, a bookstore cafe. You even had a name for it, the Crooked Spine." She turned to him, eyes wide. "You remembered?" "I remember everything you say." She stood still, overwhelmed. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I want you to know that your dreams aren't lost. They're just waiting." Her voice cracked. "Ethan, I can't accept something like this." "I'm not asking you to," he said quickly. "I'm not giving this to you. I'm sharing it with you, if you want it. If you ever think maybe the life you imagined doesn't have to stay in your imagination." She shook her head, half laughing, half crying. "You're impossible." He stepped closer, but not too close. "You make me want to be." That night, they sat on the floor of the abandoned bookstore, eating Thai food out of cartons, laughing about the worst books they'd ever read and the ones that saved them when nothing else could. They made lists of authors they would feature, teas they would serve, the color of the chairs that would never match. When they walked out, Grace looked back one last time. "It feels like a beginning," she said. Ethan smiled. "That's because it is." She didn't say yes, not yet, but she also didn't walk away. And sometimes that's the loudest yes a heart can whisper. The following weeks passed not like a whirlwind, but like pages turning in a well-loved book, each moment folding gently into the next, carrying the scent of something familiar and yet unwritten. Grace found herself moving through her days with a softness she didn't recognize at first. There was still work, still fatigue, still bills to juggle and responsibilities she couldn't hand off. But now, those things didn't feel like the whole story. Something else was growing beneath them, like roots extending quietly into new soil. It wasn't the bookstore space itself that changed her. It was what it meant. For the first time in her life, she didn't have to just imagine her future. She could touch it, feel the dust on her fingers, see the sun hitting the front windows in the late afternoon, and believe, tentatively but sincerely, that she belonged to something more than survival. Ethan came by almost every evening, sometimes with food, sometimes with building supplies, always with questions. What kind of chairs did she envision? Would she want live music on weekends? Was she okay with mismatched teacups? Or would that feel too chaotic? He never made decisions without her. He never assumed. And slowly, impossibly, Grace started to trust that this was real. Not just the bookstore, but him, his presence, the steadiness of his showing up again and again. She kept waiting for the catch because that's what the world had taught her to expect. People didn't stay. They gave when it was convenient. They loved when it was easy. They disappeared when it wasn't. But Ethan didn't ask for anything in return. He didn't press for labels or declarations. He just gave her space and showed up inside it again and again. One night, she found herself sitting cross-legged on the floor of the bookstore, surrounded by old wooden shelves they'd repainted together. Her fingers were stained with blue, the same color as the ocean she'd never seen in person, and across. From her, Ethan was struggling with a drill, laughing under his breath as the screws kept sliding out of place. "You know," she said, watching him, "you're not very good at this." "I know," he replied. "I was hoping I'd be better at this than I am. At screwing in shelves, at building something that matters." She grew quiet. The moment hung in the air, heavier than the paint fumes and deeper than any silence between them had ever been. "This matters to you?" she asked. He looked up at her. "You matter to me." There was no drama in his voice, no performance, just truth. Plain and terrifying and beautiful. Grace sat still, her heartbeat a steady thrum in her ears. "I don't know how to love someone who won't leave," she said, eyes fixed on the grain of the wood beneath her. "I've always expected people to go." "I'm not going," he said softly. "Not unless you ask me to." She looked up at him then, and something inside her, some stubborn wall she had clung to out of fear, crumbled. Slowly, without needing permission, she reached for his hand, and he met her there. The first time they kissed, it wasn't under the perfect lighting or in the middle of some orchestrated moment. It happened in the back room of the bookstore, between stacks of half-unpacked books, with her hands covered in dust and his shirt streaked with paint. It wasn't neat or rehearsed. It was real. And when his lips met hers, she didn't feel swept away. She felt grounded, present. Like maybe for once she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Afterward, neither of them said anything right away. They didn't need to. The silence between them had changed. It no longer held fear. It held promise. In the days that followed, they found a rhythm. Mornings at the cafe, afternoons spent repairing, dreaming, designing. Evenings walking home, together, sometimes speaking, sometimes not. They weren't a couple in the traditional sense. There had been no conversation about what to call this thing between them, but it didn't matter. They knew. That was enough. The bookstore's soft opening was set for the end of the month. Grace had chosen to call it the Crooked Spine, just as she'd dreamed all those years ago on her childhood rooftop with her sister. Lily had returned, surprised at first by the bookstore but thrilled nonetheless, stepping in to help organize events and run the community board. It felt like everything Grace had once lost was slowly circling back to her, not in the same shape, but in a new one she had a hand in creating. The night before the opening, Ethan invited her back to the space after hours. She arrived expecting a late-night paint session or a last-minute shelf adjustment. Instead, she walked in and found the lights dimmed. A small table set in the center of the room with candles flickering gently, 2 plates, and a single bouquet of wildflowers that looked freshly picked. "What is this?" she asked, stunned. He stood behind the table, smiling. "A celebration. We haven't even opened yet. We don't need customers to celebrate a beginning." She stepped closer, letting the soft light wrap around her. "You did all this?" "I did very little," he said. "I just wanted to remind you what it feels like to be cherished." Grace blinked, fighting back sudden tears. "You make it too easy to believe in things. Then let me be the one thing that doesn't disappear when you do." They ate in comfortable quiet. Afterward, he walked her home, the city silent around them, the sky scattered with stars. At her doorstep, she turned to him, searching his face. "What happens after this?" she asked. "We keep showing up," he said. "One day at a time. No promises we can't keep. Just truth." She nodded. "And if I fall?" "I'll be there," he whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Not to catch you, but to fall with you." The next morning, The crooked spine opened its doors. The windows gleamed. The shelves were full. The bell above the door chimed with the rhythm of something new, something sacred. People came. Neighbors. Friends. Strangers drawn in by the scent of fresh coffee and old pages. Ethan stood in the corner, quiet, watching her. Grace moved through the space with a confidence she had never known. Her apron dusted with flour from the muffins she had baked that morning, her eyes alive in a way they hadn't been in years. When a child pointed to the hand-painted sign with the crooked lettering and asked what it meant, Grace knelt down and said, "It means we're allowed to be imperfect. It means we're allowed to take up space, even if we don't look the way people expect us to." The child smiled. So did Grace. Later that day, when the sun dipped low and the last customer left, Grace locked the front door and turned to find Ethan still waiting. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "What's this?" she asked. He handed it to her without speaking. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the deed to the building, signed over in her name. "I don't need this," she said, voice shaking. "I know," he said, "but you deserve it." She stared at him, overwhelmed. "I don't know how to thank you." "Then don't," he said. "Just keep building." She stepped forward, wrapped her arms around him, not like the accidental hug at the airport all those weeks ago, but like someone who had finally chosen to hold on. This time, it wasn't a mistake. This time, it was the beginning of everything. She never thought she could have. And when he held her back, his voice low against her ear, he said only one thing. "I've been waiting to belong to something. I didn't know it would be you." And in that moment, Grace finally understood. Love, the real kind, wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention or arrive perfectly wrapped. It grew slowly, quietly, in the spaces where people showed up and stayed. It looked like chipped mugs and crooked shelves, like silent dinners and shared dreams. Like a bookstore with mismatched furniture and a girl who finally let herself believe she was worthy of more than what the world had handed her. It looked like two people who had nothing in common but everything to offer. It looked like home. Indy. A world driven by appearances, status, and unspoken rules. This story reminds us of something timeless and deeply human. Love, true love, often finds us when we least expect it, and in the most imperfect of moments. Grace and Ethan's journey wasn't about wealth or charm or chance encounters. It was about two people learning to trust again, to heal from what life had broken, and to choose each other despite the odds. Their story teaches us that vulnerability is not weakness, but strength. That real connection isn't built in grand gestures, but in the quiet, everyday moments where someone chooses to stay. It's a powerful reminder that no matter who we are or where we come from, we are worthy of love, of dreams, and of beginning again. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and support us so we can continue bringing you more beer.